How do you make remote engagement really, really easy? Right. So you might be an educator or a leader, and your aim is to make your meetings, your gathering, your virtual conferences, your classes, your trainings, your workshops really engaging and not create this Zoom fatigue burnout that many of us have experienced. So this video is intended to unpack a ridiculous amount of quick little nuanced tidbits, ideas, techniques, tips, really concrete activities for you to be able to ruthlessly misinterpret what I share, what I say, and apply it to your own context, right? Because nobody knows your world, your life, your niche, your bubble better than you do. And so what I'd love to do is share a bunch of possible ideas and invite you to pick the ones that are most useful and twist, warp, and adapt them to make your own and fit your context. So some of the things that I'll be sharing will use some of our tools that you might be familiar with and have on your desk somewhere. So either our We Connect cards or our We Engage cards, connection toolkit, which comes along with a handful of other items, including me and Will's book, Ask Powerful Questions, Create Conversations That Matter. And I'm sharing and holding up this because I'm assuming that no matter what your context is, that you have an intention to create a conversation that matters. I don't talk to very many people who say, oh, I'd love to get everybody into a gathering together so that we could totally waste our time and not be, and have a conversation that doesn't matter, right? Strive to talk about stuff that makes a difference in the world. So first, I just want to unpack a couple ingredients to creating high engagement experiences. And when I think engagement, I think you can be in your participants, whether they be students, employees, or actual attendees of a conference. They can be in three states of mind. And we oscillate, all of us as human beings oscillate between these at any given moment, right? So we can be in the place of a critic, consumer, or contributor, right? So critic, really comfortable pointing out what's wrong with whatever's happening, pretty uninterested about doing anything about it. To consumer, right? The metaphor I like to think about for this is like the passive scroller, the person who's in your session, in person or virtual, who's just kind of like flying under the radar, doesn't need to make a big noise, not interested in really actively contributing in any way, just kind of cruising along. And then the third mindset is contributor, right? It's when the people in our gatherings realize that they are not actually victims to our little micro cyber world that we're creating. They're not victims to our meeting in that moment. Rather, they are actually active contributors and can edit the course and the way things go. That's what we want in our groups, right? We want people who are leaning in, who are ready to actually contribute and engage. And so in terms of mindsets, I would just look at the flow, look at your agenda. Does it actually create space for people to contribute? How often are you inviting people's voice into the room? How often are you inviting people to connect with each other? How often are you inviting people to give you visual feedback, right? So if you're on Zoom, in person, you can hear the metaphorical eye rolls or literal eye rolls, or you can hear the like, ooh, of the group, or the like, I'm thinking about that. You can hear all that. On Zoom, it's silence, it's a vacuum. In fact, somebody once actually pointed out the fact that the camera on most computers is actually a black hole. Right, which means, and I think it acts like that sometimes. You might have felt this. It actually sucks our energy, or has the ability to suck our energy when we're delivering, facilitating, teaching virtually. And so, just having that metaphor, that idea, gives us permission not to give all of our energy there. So, okay, riffing a little bit on context here. Now, I want to give you some concrete ideas and techniques. The first one is use what you don't have in person. Use what you don't have in person. What you don't have is the context of everybody's space around you and all these analog visuals and props, right? So if we were in person, I might not have this lovely beating heart to say, okay, we're about to do something. We're going to jump in a conversation. We're going to share something that you may not have shared before, and your heart rate might be going up. This might be out of your comfort zone, and that is okay. right? Like all of a sudden my content becomes way more interesting and visual when I bring something analog into visual, right? Your content doesn't need to be shared over screen share. You don't need PowerPoint slides. You don't need, right? You can do things, have stuff on your desk that helps analog. So I've got a number of these little items that I've had that allow me to say, okay, I really want to listen to what the group has to say about this, right? I'd love to talk about what you're thinking and what you're feeling right now. And these are like, you don't have my props. Don't use my props. Get your own props. And what I mean by that is look around the house. What are things that you have already that allow people to connect or visualize your content in some way, right? So even if I think about, like, oh, I need to share really boring KPI information about a certain meeting, like, cool, go cut out the key number goal that you're reaching out of paper and hold that up. That will be way more visually engaging, stimulating, and memorable than if you just say it or click through on a slide, right? So thinking about creative ways. For me, bringing in some of our tools, I oftentimes use WeConnect cards and hold up some of our question cards, right? So the cards in this deck are color-coded. And so I might hold up this color code on Zoom and say, all right, in the chat, type which question you'd love to answer. And I'm going to take kind of the most popular response, and I'll hold up that color question, and we're going to split out into breakouts to have a conversation. Boom. Right? All of a sudden, people actually have to be tuned in. They have to have screen in the front of their view to see what's going on, to make sure that they don't skip a beat. Right, virtually, I like to move pretty quickly, especially if you're working with students. Think about the content that they're adjusted to. They're used to YouTube videos where someone spent 45 hours filming a 6-minute piece of content that's like fast, has all these cuts and stuff like that. And so if you're delivering, or you're in a meeting, or you're delivering a class, like, I believe that if we try to keep up with the content, if we try to make our content interesting, we will lose out on a major opportunity to find out what our students and our people are interested about, right? So it's more important. I think the old adage of, like, it's more important to be interested than interesting. I would say the same is true for the way that you're delivering things, right? Tapping into people's interests. And so for me, I use these tools, the question cards, as connection before content. So say you've got standing meeting every Monday, or you've got a class Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I'll go through the deck and pick out a question that somehow connects to that theme or the content or what we're talking about that day. And I'll start out with some connection before content where I'll hold up the question, invite people to get into breakouts, split them out into those. Or if I don't have the ability to do breakouts, right, I may just invite a handful of people to popcorn out their answers and share with the group. That connection at scale is still really powerful. But if you do that in sequence, right, it sets a very different tone for contribution in your meetings rather than consumption or just sitting back and critiquing and pointing out what's wrong, what they don't like about X meeting, X format, X content, whatever that is. So one of the ways that I use We Engage cards in a way that might be really helpful is by helping them frame the context for conversation. Quotes, the human brain, I don't know why, but the human brain is wired to connect really well with other people's words that were written down, whether they're dead or not. Now, We Engage cards, we worked really hard to not make sure a bunch of dead white guys' words ended up in the deck. And so it's from a really lovely, diverse swath in both perspective, philosophy, race, religion, occupation, right? So we got some really dynamic quotes. This happens to be a white guy. But, right, if you hold up this quote, everyone you will ever meet knows something you don't, before you invite people to share their response to this question, right, is a really cool invitation to say, hey, in this moment, you have the chance to learn something from somebody else, not teacher, not leader, not person at top of hierarchy, right? So really, really phenomenally useful to dive into that and just unpack and share, frame up the conversation around this context. So the other way, if we can switch cameras around here a little bit, whoa, you can screen share on almost every platform. And so sometimes what I like to do, just to literally mix up the format and visuals, to be like, whoa, people need to pay attention to something kind of new and funky. And sometimes tech doesn't work, and that's okay. So by the way, I'm screen sharing. I'm using an app which sometimes likes to disconnect. But if you're actually on Zoom, you can screen share your phone, iPad, tablet device, etc. So let's try this again. I might hold these up just to mix up the format and say, okay, here's a color code. Pick which question you want to answer. Or I might have a bunch of We Engage cards laid out and say, everybody just call out, as I'm holding this camera over here, choose a card that represents a future that you want to create, right? So choose a card that represents a future that you want to create and have them actually unmute and read out some of these quotes aloud. I would have more quotes laid out if I was actually doing this. But also, while we're here, the camera is a phenomenal way to be a little bit vulnerable and share your context in your space, right? So I've got this like little studio thing going on back here, but in the front, bringing you into my space and showing you how things are set up, it's very visually intriguing, right? It's interesting to not just have a static webcam. Right, so if you think about the content that we're used to, thinking about YouTube, you've got cameras moving all around. It might be in selfie view on a GoPro. Like there's all sorts of stuff going on. And so the more that you can mix that up, and screen sharing and literally just pulling up your camera app is a really beautiful way to do that. The other thing that I really appreciate about the We Engage cards is there's quotes on one side and there's a bunch of images on the other. How interesting, right? You could just put pictures in your slideshow or your PowerPoint. How much more intriguing to pick out a couple images that connect to core ideas or points that you want to get across with the group. Because the brain is wired to take visual data and experiential data and encode it into long-term memory and actually hang on to it. Whereas language and numbers tends to hop in a short-term memory and then leave our brains. It's the reason that a phone number is chunked by digits, because our puny little 8-pound blocks that sit on the top of our head can't hang on to information long enough for us, or those 10, 13 digits long enough in order to dial the number on the phone. So we chunk the information. Using visuals helps with that. Specifically, analog visuals helps with that. Okay, a couple last minute ideas from our book that we've taken and adapted to a virtual context that are immensely useful. And this is, I probably should have put this one at the beginning. It's one of the most remarkably useful little nuggets. And so the book is based off this pyramid. So if you can read that, right? Imagine if you could just wave a magic wand at the beginning of your meeting, conference, gathering, etc., and people would feel like you were really willing to know them, like you saw them, you heard them, you got them, and ultimately you were actually with them. It'd be cool, right? But it's hard, and that magic wand doesn't exist. And so the book that Will and I put together is, on the flip side of this pyramid, is the how do you actually accomplish that? And at this level, in the second chapter of the book, rapport, which we define as building a relationship of trust with another human being, the tool that we offer is to follow your natural, genuine curiosity based on what somebody's wearing, carrying, sharing, or presenting. And this was written in an in-person context. Virtually, it's really, really cool because we can do that with the backgrounds that people have that they've, for the most part, chosen to be behind, right? Like I knew that I was going to be filming a video, right? So I had some sense that was happening. And so I was deliberate about hanging my map upside down. And right, this reminds me of Mr. DeMello in 7th grade social studies class and the way that he totally shifted my paradigm, my perspective by hanging his map upside down. So everything that you see in somebody's background, if you follow your natural genuine curiosity, is a portal to a potential connection to something about who they are, what they care about, etc. Right? So if you see a picture on somebody's wall, just being curious about that and asking that curiosity has the potential to transport you to their world and then invite them into your world. So following your natural, genuine curiosity. And we can do this with the chat as well. right? So in the chat, I think sometimes we forget that human beings actually contributed to the chat. You can respond to the chat as if they were a human being, because they are. Whew, okay, I could go so much more. If you've got questions, you want some more free resources, definitely check out weand.me/ideas. There's tons of free stuff that we give away there, and hope to hang out with you in cyberspace or real space sometime soon. Cheers.